In the autumn of 1812, deep in the shadowed folds of the Appalachian wilderness, a myth was born from an act of impossible courage. It was a story whispered on the wind, carried by creek water and campfire smoke, of a lone frontiersman who stared into the fury of a mountain and walked away with the future of a people cradled in his bleeding hands. This is not a legend carved in stone, but a true account etched into the memory of the Cherokee and written in the scars of a man named Samuel Grant. It begins with a boy's cry, the rancid breath of a grizzly, and a single shot that would echo through the halls of history, binding two disparate worlds with a debt that could only be repaid with loyalty. The world of Samuel Grant was one of measured silence and deliberate movement. A trapper and hunter of some renown, he had carved a solitary existence from the vast, untamed territory where the borders of Tennessee, Georgia, and the Cherokee Nation blurred into a green, trackless sea. He was a man more at home with the language of animal tracks and the scent of pine than with the clamor of settlements. His cabin, a humble structure of notched logs nestled in a sheltered cove, spoke of a life pared down to essentials. On this particular morning, a sharp, crystalline frost clung to the fallen leaves, and Samuel moved with a quiet purpose, checking his traps along a familiar creek bed. His mind was on practical things, the price of beaver pelts in Chattanooga, the need to mend his winter coat. Miles away, in the Cherokee town of Etowah, life followed the ancient rhythms of the season. Among the bustling activity of harvest preparation, a 12-year-old boy named A.Y., meaning deer, chafed under the watchful eyes of his mother. His spirit, like his namesake, was restless and drawn to the deep woods. He had listened, wide-eyed, to the elders speak of the sacred places in the high mountains, of the spirit animals that dwelled there. Against explicit instructions, his curiosity overpowered caution. Slipping away with a small bow and a handful of arrows, Y ventured further upstream than he had ever gone, following the path of a majestic eagle soaring toward the ridges. The forest, initially welcoming, grew thicker, the light fading to a murky green. The familiar sounds of his village were swallowed by the chatter of unfamiliar birds and the relentless rush of water over rocks. A sense of unease, both thrilling and terrifying, prickled at his skin, but his pride wouldn't let him turn back. Samuel's keen eyes, always scanning the ground, found a set of tracks that made his blood run cold. They were enormous, pressed deep into the soft earth of the creek bank. The splayed, clawed prints of a valley grizzly, a creature of raw power and unpredictable temper. It was a boar, and from the freshness of the sign and the agitated drag of one foot, it was wounded, perhaps from a fight with another bear or a lucky shot from a hunter who then lost its trail. A wounded grizzly was the most dangerous animal in these woods. Samuel immediately unslung his long rifle, the familiar weight of the .50 caliber Kentucky flintlock settling into his hands. His peaceful morning had vanished. He was now a participant in a different, more deadly dance. A.Y., meanwhile, had stumbled upon a breathtaking sight, a hidden waterfall cascading into a pristine, mossy grotto. For a moment, his fear was forgotten in wonder. He knelt to drink from the cool pool, his reflection staring back, a small figure in a vast world. It was then the world went silent. The bird stopped singing. The very air seemed to thicken. A.Y. froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. From the dense thicket of laurel across the pool, a shape emerged. It was a mountain of matted brown fur, standing easily 9 feet tall on its hind legs. The bear's small, dark eyes fixed on him, and a low, rumbling growl vibrated in the boy's chest. It was the wounded boar, its shoulder festering, pain fueling its rage. A.Y.'s breath caught in his throat. He fumbled for an arrow, his small bow suddenly feeling like a toy. The bear dropped to all fours and charged. The sudden, raw scream of terror that shattered the forest silence was not animal. Samuel, already tracking the bear's sign, knew instantly what it meant. He broke into a reckless run, crashing through underbrush, his body moving with an urgency that overrode all care for stealth. The scream turned into a high-pitched cry, mixed with the deafening roars of the bear. Samuel burst into the grotto to see a scene from a nightmare. The grizzly had swatted the boy against a boulder, and Ewa lay crumpled, a dark stain spreading on his deerskin tunic. The bear, seeing a new threat, turned. Time slowed. Samuel raised his rifle, but the bear was already moving, a blur of fury and power. He had one shot. The distance was closing too fast. He couldn't aim for the vital heart, shielded by bone and muscle. He saw the bear's gaping maw, the strings of saliva, the blood on its claws. Samuel forced his breath to steady, his world narrowing to the sights of his rifle and the beast's oncoming bulk. He fired. The boom of the rifle was colossal in the enclosed space. Samuel's shot, taken in a fraction of a second, struck the grizzly in its open mouth, tearing up through the palate and into its brain. The colossal creature's charge ceased as if it had run into an invisible wall. It shuddered, let out a wet, choking sound, and collapsed, its massive body hitting the ground with a sickening thud just feet from the unconscious boy. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the coppery scent of blood and the animal's musky odor. Samuel, hands trembling now, didn't pause to reload. He rushed to AY. The boy was alive, but badly wounded. Deep gashes scored his chest and leg, and his arm lay at a sickening angle. Samuel's medical knowledge was frontier basic, born of necessity. He staunched the worst of the bleeding with strips torn from his own shirt, splinted the broken arm with a piece of driftwood and more cloth, and gently cleaned the wounds with water from the falls. He knew the boy couldn't walk, and they were miles from any help. With careful, powerful movements, Samuel lifted AY, feeling the boy's feverish heat even through his clothes. Cradling him as gently as he could, the trapper began the long, arduous journey back toward the Cherokee town, leaving the carcass of the grizzly as a silent testament to the violence that had just passed. The journey out of the high wilderness was a slow, agonizing pilgrimage. Samuel moved with a determined, plodding rhythm, every step a calculated effort to minimize the jostling of his fragile burden. AY drifted in and, out of consciousness, his mumbled words in Cherokee a soft, feverish counterpoint to Samuel's labored breathing. The trapper spoke to him in a low, steady voice, not knowing if the boy understood his English. "Hold on now. Not much farther. You're a strong one, I can tell." He navigated by a hunter's internal map, choosing the least treacherous paths, fording icy creeks with the boy held high, his own boots soaking through. As the sun began its descent, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees, Samuel knew he had to stop. He found a shallow cave, more a rock overhang, and built a small contained fire. He forced water between AY's parched lips and redressed the wounds with what clean material he had left, his face grim in the flickering light. Infection was the real enemy now, and they were still a day's hard travel from Etowah. Back in the village, as dusk settled, AY's absence had been discovered. His mother, Elu, was beside herself with a mother's frantic grief. The town's headman, a respected elder named Anacona, had organized search parties. Skilled trackers, they had found AY's trail leading into the high country, and then, with growing dread, they had found the signs of the bear, the massive, wounded tracks. Their hopes, already dim, sank further. They knew what a meeting with such a creature meant. They returned to the village in a somber procession, preparing the community for the worst. Elu's wails of mourning had already begun to rise into the twilight. It was just after dawn the next day when a sentry posted at the village's edge saw a figure emerge from the mist clinging to the river valley. It was a white man, staggering with exhaustion, his clothes torn and bloodied, carrying what looked like a bundle of rags. As the figure drew closer, the sentry saw it was a child. He sounded the alarm. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered at the edge of the cornfields. Samuel, his vision blurring with fatigue, saw the shapes of people running toward him. He gently laid AY on a bed of dry grass, and then, his strength finally, spent, sank to his knees beside him. The Cherokee surrounded them, their faces a mix of shock, suspicion, and sudden, desperate hope. Elu pushed through the crowd. When she saw her son, broken but alive, a cry tore from her throat that was equal parts anguish and joy. She fell to the ground, gathering him into her arms, weeping and whispering his name. Anacona approached Samuel, who remained on his knees, head bowed, trying to catch his breath. The elder's eyes were sharp, missing no detail. The man's evident exhaustion, the care taken in the makeshift bandages, the protective way he had positioned himself near the boy even now. "You bring AY?" Anacona asked in careful English. Samuel nodded, finding his voice, which came out rough and cracked. "Bear up in the high grotto by the falls. The boy's brave. He's hurt bad." He gestured weakly toward the mountains. "Bear's dead." A murmur ran through the crowd. Killing a valley Grizzly single-handedly was a feat of almost mythical proportions. The village healer, an older woman named Galaji, took charge. She directed men to carry AY carefully to a council house, sending runners for specific herbs and medicines. She glanced at Samuel, her eyes assessing his condition with a practitioner's calm. "You come," she said. It was not a request. Samuel was led not to a guest lodge, but to the council house itself, a place of honor and solemnity. He was given a place by the fire, a bowl of venison stew, and a warm blanket. As he ate, the sheer weight of his exertion crashed down upon him. He watched as Galaji and her assistants worked over AY with a quiet efficiency, using poultices of herbs Samuel didn't recognize and singing low, rhythmic songs. The atmosphere was tense, but focused. Anacona sat across the fire from Samuel, waiting. When the healer finally nodded, indicating the boy was stable and sleeping, Anacona spoke. "Tell the story. All of it." And so Samuel did. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, describing the tracks, the scream, the charge, the single shot, the long carry. He did not paint himself as a hero. He spoke as a man who had done what was necessary in the moment. The Cherokee listened in absolute silence. When he finished, Anacona stared into the fire for a long time. "You risked your life for a Cherokee boy you did not know," he said finally. "You entered the spirit's place and fought its guardian. This is a heavy thing. A debt is made." Samuel expected perhaps some gratitude, maybe supplies for his journey home. Instead, he found himself an honored if confined guest. Anacona made it clear. Samuel was not to leave until AY's fate was known, and until the town had deliberated on the meaning of his act. For 3 days, Samuel rested and healed his own minor cuts and bruises. He was treated with a formal, profound respect that felt heavier than any suspicion. People brought him small gifts of food, but their eyes held not just thanks, but a deep, searching curiosity. He was a walking anomaly, a white man who had performed an act of ultimate courage and selflessness for a Cherokee child, with no hope of reward. In a time of increasing tension between the expanding American settlements and the Cherokee Nation, where trust was as scarce as hen's teeth, Samuel Grant was a puzzle. During the days, Samuel would walk through the village under the watchful but not unfriendly eyes of the people. He saw the ordered, prosperous life of Etowah, the sturdy winter houses, the overflowing corn cribs, the children playing a stickball game. He saw the mix of traditional ways and adopted practices. Some men wore a combination of buckskin and woven cloth, some used iron tools alongside stone ones. He understood, with a growing clarity, that this was not a savage camp, but a community under threat, clinging to its land and its future. He heard snippets of worried conversation about pressure from the state of Georgia, about distant talks in Washington, about the looming war between the Americans and the British to the north. The Cherokee were caught in a vice, and they knew it. On the evening of the 3rd day, AY awoke. His fever had broken. The first face he saw, after his mother's, was Samuel's, sitting quietly in the corner of the healing house. The boy's eyes, clear now, held no fear, only a profound, unspoken understanding. He spoke a few soft words in Cherokee to his mother. Elu turned to Samuel, tears in her eyes. He says the bear spirit was angry, but a greater spirit stood in front of him. He says you walked with a straight heart. This message, from the boy who had looked death in the face, carried more weight than any council's decree. It confirmed the truth of Samuel's story in the most spiritual sense. That night, a formal council fire was lit. Samuel was asked to attend and sit beside Anacona. The men and women of influence in the town gathered. The discussion was long, conducted in Cherokee, with occasional translations whispered to Samuel by a young man who had spent time in a white settlement. They spoke of the debt, the udi that was now owed. This was not a simple matter of exchanging a gift for a service. It was a spiritual and social bond. To not properly acknowledge a deed of this magnitude would bring imbalance. They spoke of the changing world, of the broken promises from Washington, of the encroaching settlers who saw them as obstacles. They spoke of Samuel Grant, not as a representative of the United States, but as an individual whose character was now proven in the most definitive way. Finally, Anacona stood and addressed Samuel directly, the young man translating. Samuel Grant, you have done more than save one boy. You have shown our people the face of a different kind of white man. In this act, we see a man of courage, of heart, of responsibility. These are qualities we honor. Our council has spoken. The debt we owe cannot be repaid with pelts or horses. It must be repaid with something of equal value. Therefore, we make this pledge. The people of Etowah and our allied towns in this valley pledge our allegiance and our friendship to you, Samuel Grant. Where you go, you will have brothers. Your enemies will be our enemies. Your cause, if it is just, will be our cause. This is our word, which will not be broken. Samuel was stunned into silence. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. He was a solitary man being offered the strength and loyalty of an entire community. He knew, instinctively, that this pledge was not given lightly. It was a thread of alliance being woven in a darkening time. He looked at the faces around the fire, saw their solemn expectation, and felt the weight of history settle on his shoulders. He simply bowed his head and said, I am honored, and I give you my word in return. It was a simple exchange, but in the crackle of the council fire, it felt like a treaty had been signed. Samuel stayed in Etowah for 2 more weeks, until AY could walk again with the aid of a stick. The boy became his shadow, and through a combination of gestures, shared moments, and the patient translations of the young man named Degadoga, a bond formed. Samuel showed AY how to track a deer, explaining the subtleties of a disturbed leaf or a bent blade of grass. AY, in turn, taught Samuel word for the plants and animals and the stories behind the constellations that wheeled above them at night. Samuel was no longer just a rescuer. He was becoming Adonishji, a friend, an adopted member of the wider family. Before he left, Anacona asked for a private conversation. In his house, surrounded by the smell of smoke and dried herbs, the elder's demeanor was grave. You go back to your world, Samuel Grant. You will hear things. You will hear that the Cherokee are siding with the British in the war to the north, or that we are preparing to fight the Georgians. You will hear that we are a problem to be removed. He puffed on a pipe, the smoke curling in the dim light. Our pledge to you is personal, but the world does not see personal things. It sees only nations. We are trying to find a path to keep our land, our children's future. We will talk to the American agents. We will make treaties on paper. But you have our true word written in blood and courage, not ink. Remember that. Samuel returned to his cabin, a changed man. The solitude felt different, no longer just a preference, but a choice that now held the echo of community. He resumed his trapping, but his mind was occupied with the gravity of the pledge he had been given. He traveled to Chattanooga to sell his furs, and there, in the rough taverns and trading posts, he heard the talk Anacona had predicted. He heard contemptuous slurs against the Cherokee, calls for their land to be seized, rumors of militia being raised to clear the territory. He heard the Cherokee referred to as savages and obstacles to progress. Each word felt like a betrayal of the kindness, honor, and deep humanity he had just witnessed. He held his tongue, but his silence was a simmering pot. The test came sooner than expected. In the spring of 1813, a group of opportunistic raiders, using the chaos of the War of 1812 as cover, began stealing horses from Cherokee outlying farms, claiming they were taking from British sympathizers. They were white men from the fringes of settlement, violent and drunk on their own impunity. They targeted Etowah's horse herd, a source of wealth and mobility for the town. The Cherokee, following the legal paths they believed in, sent word to the American Indian agent. The agent overworked and biased did little. Frustration and anger grew in the town. They had been wronged, and the system meant to protect them had failed. It was Degadoga who found Samuel riding hard to his cabin one evening. He explained the situation, his face etched with frustration. They took 20 horses, including Anacona's own stallion. They laughed when our men protested. The agent says he will look into it. We know these men. They camp at the Old Salt Lick near the river fork. Samuel asked no further questions. He simply nodded, fetched his rifle, and saddled his horse. This was the concrete meaning of the pledge. An enemy of Etowah had shown itself. He did not ride with the Cherokee war party that set out the next dawn. He rode ahead, alone. He found the raiders' camp easily. They were careless, noisy, and arrogant. Samuel walked into their camp in broad daylight, his rifle cradled in his arms but not raised. There were 5 of them, rough-looking characters around a fire. Their leader, a man with a broken nose named Haggard, stood up with a sneer. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. You lost, trapper. The horses you took belonged to my friends in Etowah," Samuel said, his voice level and cold. "You will return them. Today." Haggard laughed, and his men joined in. "Your friends? You mean those thieving Indians? We're just reclaiming what's due. Now get out of here before you get hurt." Samuel didn't move. "I know your names. Haggard, Billings, Cobb, the 2 Miller brothers. I know you have families over in Murphy's settlement. The Cherokee want their horses back. If they don't get them, they will come for them. And if they come, you will not survive it. I am giving you a chance to walk away from a fight you cannot win." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Or you can fight me for them, here and now." The laughter died. They saw the absolute certainty in Samuel's eyes. They saw a man who had faced down a grizzly and was not afraid of 5 bullies. They also knew, despite their bluster, that a coordinated attack by the Cherokee warriors would be a disaster for them. Haggard's bravado crumbled under the weight of this reality. Muttering curses, they eventually, grudgingly, rounded up the horses. Samuel watched them, his rifle now pointed casually in their direction, until the last horse was on the trail back toward Etowah. He followed at a distance, ensuring they didn't double back. That evening, the horses were returned to a grateful and vindicated village. Samuel had not fired a shot. He had used his knowledge, his reputation, and the unspoken thread of the Cherokee pledge behind him as his weapon. The bond had been tested, and it had held strong as iron. The return of the horses without bloodshed solidified Samuel's status from honored guest to a true legend within the Cherokee community. The story of his lone confrontation with the raiders spread through the towns, interweaving with the tale of the Grizzly. He was no longer just Samuel Grant. He was becoming Yona Ujidali, the Bear's Heart, a name denoting immense bravery and unwavering strength. He maintained his cabin, but spent increasing time in Etowah, his presence a living bridge between 2 worlds that were growing further apart by the day. As the years passed, the pressure on the Cherokee intensified. The War of 1812 ended, and with the external threat of the British gone, American expansionism turned its full focus westward. The state of Georgia passed laws annulling Cherokee sovereignty on their own lands. Gold was discovered on Cherokee territory, and a flood of squatters and prospectors descended, lawless and violent. The Cherokee, under leaders like Major Ridge and John Ross, pursued a path of legal resistance, taking their case to the Supreme Court and winning a landmark victory in Worcester versus Georgia. But President Andrew Jackson infamously ignored the ruling, setting the stage for forced removal. Through all this turmoil, Samuel's unique position became a quiet, steadfast anchor for the people of Etowah. He served as an unofficial advisor and liaison, using his understanding of the white settlers' mindset to warn the council of potential dangers. He could go into settlements and hear plans that would never be spoken in front of a Cherokee. He relayed information about militia movements, about corrupt agents, about the rising tide of sentiment for removal. He was a one-man early warning system, and the trust the Cherokee placed in him was absolute. Their pledge of allegiance had transformed into a deep, strategic, and personal alliance. In the winter of 1837, as the shadow of the Trail of Tears began to darken the land, the final, most profound test of the pledge arrived. Federal soldiers and state militia were systematically rounding up Cherokee families, forcing them into stockades to await the deadly march west. Etowah was targeted. Samuel, now in his late 50s but still formidable, was at his cabin when Degadoga, now a grown man and a leader himself, arrived with a desperate request. They're coming for the families in the hidden valley tomorrow at dawn. The soldiers, they have a list. They will take them to the Ross's landing stockade. Samuel, we cannot fight an army, but we can hide some. The children, can you take them? It was an unimaginable risk. Harboring Cherokees sought for deportation was a federal crime. It could mean the loss of his land, his freedom, or his life. Samuel looked at Degadoga, seeing the face of a young translator he had known, now lined with the worry of a father and a leader. He thought of A.Y., now a man with children of his own. He thought of Anacona, long since passed, who had spoken of a debt and a word that would not be broken. Without hesitation, Samuel said, "Get them here." After dark, that night, under a moonless sky, 10 Cherokee children, ranging in age from 4 to 12, were quietly brought to Samuel's cabin by their parents in heart-wrenching, silent goodbyes. The parents knew they might never see their children again, but this was a chance for them to live, to avoid the disease and death of the stockades and the trail. Samuel had prepared a hidden root cellar beneath his floor, ventilated and stocked with what supplies he could muster. For 3 tense weeks, as the roundup continued in the region, Samuel hid the children. He played the role of a confused, cooperative old trapper when soldiers came by, which they did twice. He told them he'd seen no one, that the Cherokee in these parts had all gone willingly. His reputation as a somewhat eccentric but harmless old-timer, and his status as a white man, protected him from the most invasive searches. When the immediate danger passed, and the soldiers moved on to other areas, Samuel began the next, dangerous phase. Using his knowledge of the most remote mountain paths known only to a few trappers and the Cherokee themselves, he led the children, under cover of darkness and through terrible weather, north into the wilds of the Smoky Mountains, to a remote and secret Cherokee holding village that had thus far avoided detection. It was a journey of sheer endurance and nerve. When he finally delivered the last child safely into the arms of waiting relatives in that hidden sanctuary, he collapsed from exhaustion, a deep pneumonia setting into his lungs. Samuel Grant survived that illness, but his health was broken. He returned to his cabin, now a silent, empty place. The Cherokee who remained in the area, a scattered few who had escaped the roundup, looked after him in secret, leaving food and medicine. He lived just long enough to hear the horrific reports of the Trail of Tears, the thousands who died of exposure, disease, and heartbreak. It confirmed the monstrous reality he had fought against in his own small way. He died in the autumn of 1839, the same season he had saved a boy decades before. He was buried on a quiet knoll near his cabin by Degadoga, Y, and a few other Cherokee men who risked everything to honor him. They marked his grave not with a cross, but with a small, carved stone bearing 2 symbols, the paw print of a bear and a single, unbroken arrow, representing courage and loyalty. The story of Samuel Grant and the Pledge of Etowah did not die with him. It was passed down through generations of Cherokee families, a secret, cherished history of time when one man's straight heart forged a bond stronger than treaty paper and more enduring than the policies of empires. It was a story not of nations, but of individuals, a true story that proved allegiance could be earned not by conquest, but by an act of selfless courage in a mossy grotto deep in the ancient woods.